Hi, Amy Porterfield here, and I wanted to tell you about a webinar I saw this week. There was some really great content in it.
That's Amy Porterfield from 15 years ago. And this is what she's like today.
This is what I love. That looks like, I don't know. I'm not sure what.
Okay, I didn't show Amy necessarily in the best of light, but you can see that her content, production, and everything about her just in that blooper reel is much more put together and much more of a better production than was in that original clip from 15 years ago. And that's for good reason. Today, Amy Porterfield hosts one of the top rated business podcasts out there called Online Marketing Made Easy, which has over 60 million total downloads. That is bonkers. In addition to her podcast, her business over the last 14 years in total has over $100 million in total revenue, and that's doing this as a bootstrapped founder. A couple years ago, though, I got to see Amy speak at Craft and Commerce, ConvertKit's annual conference for creators. And in all of our bags, we all got this new book by Amy Porterfield, 2-week notice. Now, I'll admit, when I saw this, I was like, it's just another business book with the same tactics, maybe just motivational things and whatnot. It's really not worth my time. And to my surprise, it wasn't just another business book. It was part motivational, it was part tactical, and shared a little bit of Amy's story. It also motivated me to want to do this particular deep dive because to build a business that's earned over $100 million in total revenue is pretty darn impressive, especially being a bootstrapped founder. And I could have done this a few different ways. I could have done one on her podcast, I could do one on her consulting, but the main focus I want to start here in this deep dive is on her online courses and how she's teaching others to build online businesses. And I want to stay focused on these early days, especially the 0 to 250K in annual revenue. So let's start with Amy Porterfield's start of her career. And this is where she gets started in 1995 at the UC Santa Barbara campus. And she's originally from California, so it's kind of a natural place to go. And she ends up studying communications at UC Santa Barbara. And then she kind of follows the typical maybe corporate ladder for marketing and sales. And she starts doing events. She was an event planner at a nonprofit. And then from there, this is when she kind of starts doing sales a little bit. And she's admittedly in some interviews and things like that, she's like, I'm not a salesperson, but this sales job that she got for selling textbooks was actually a really good skill for her to learn on how to do sales. And this is actually kind of portrayed, it's helped her career in a lot of different ways. Now, from selling textbooks, she goes in a little bit of a different direction and she ends up doing marketing at Harley Davidson. And this is quite the difference because Harley Davidson has quite the brand and quite the audience and the following. This is quite a bit different from like textbooks, which like don't have an audience necessarily, or they have an audience, but they're kind of forced into it, I guess. And then Harley Davidson has this massive audience and one that's really diehards for the brand. And then from the big opportunity that she got, and this is the one that kind of kickstarted her, I think, her own business and things like that, is actually getting a job for marketing and communicating content for Tony Robbins. So marketing content, Tony Robbins, and she's working a lot, right? And so this whole period from her, starting her career to then getting a job and actually working with Tony for quite a while is a 14-year period. So she hasn't started a business in this entire 14-year period. She's really just kind of doing a few years at each place and really learning the ropes in a lot of different ways. I don't think starting a business was really on her radar necessarily, but there's a couple key moments of why Amy wanted to start her own business. And the first one Amy mentions in her book, 2-Week Notice, is being at her best friend's wedding. And in her book, she mentions like how she's like working all the time, and at her best friend's wedding was at this like coastal town with not a lot of service. And so her whole plan was in between events, the wedding events, she was going to go hide in cafes and these little spots to go get internet and keep working on different things at her best friend's wedding. Now, that plan to find Wi-Fi and do a little bit of work in between wedding events, I guess kind of worked, but at the same time it didn't, because at the wedding reception, her best friend turned to her and said, all you do is work. And Amy mentions in her book, 2-Week Notice, that the disappointment in her friend's face is still burned in her memory today. And I think that would be burned into everyone's memory. It's a pretty soul-crushing moment. So This isn't when Amy started to then start building her business, but it did start the desire that she wanted to live a different kind of life, one that wasn't consumed fully by work. She still wanted to work hard, but not have work consume her entire life. So kind of a little bit of time goes by. She goes back to work on Monday, starts still working with Tony Robbins. And she mentions that there's an aha moment in terms of maybe kind of launching this new business and kind of seeing what this new life might look like. And she mentions that it's when Tony Robbins brings in a whole group of like the OG internet entrepreneurs. So here's Tony. I guess we'll make this Tony. And then here's a conference room, right? And so there's all of these kind of, these online entrepreneurs, the OGs, as Amy puts it. And Amy kind of had the privilege to be sitting in the corner and just hearing from all of them and hearing their stories and seeing what their lives were like and just hearing all of that. And Amy mentioned that just hearing these stories was the aha moment, because she saw that they were talking a lot about this kind of similar things, one of like freedom, and that they didn't have to work all the time, and that they had control of their style of life way more than Amy had at the moment. So here's Amy in the corner, and this is the moment I think Amy started to put some plans together and like, okay, I'm going to build my own business. Now she does this, she takes a little bit of time, she takes some plans, and she has a lot of concepts in her book about how she went about it and how she recommends you might want to do about it. But she takes a little bit of time and she ends up building her own consultancy essentially. And essentially she used to call it coaching and things like that, but really in reality, what she was doing was social media for other companies. And if you just kind of like go back in time a little bit, this is like still really early days. This is still like 2009-ish. And 2009, like social media was still kind of coming on board. Like I think that's when I joined Facebook, which is pretty early in the days of how Facebook and others were just getting going. So to be building a company around social media was looked at as like, okay, what are you doing maybe a little bit? Eventually with a little bit of planning and a little bit of just talking to people, eventually Amy does leave out the door of Tony Robbins' business and starts her own company. And she has about 7 to 8 clients that she's doing their social media for. And here's Amy to actually explain how she got one of those clients because of her past job with working with Tony Robbins.
So Mike Stelzner, the owner of Social Media Examiner, he worked on a white paper for Tony when I was there. And I was the mediator between Tony and Mike. And so that's how Mike and I became friends. So when I left, he offered me to work with him as a consultant in his business. It was better than going back to what I knew because it was going to force me out. Then he gave me an opportunity to run his community. So those opportunities helped me learn more and more about what I liked and what I didn't like. And so because I had a few irons in the fire, that kept me going. But I think the taste of freedom is where the switch kind of turned on.
So as you can see from that clip from Circle's new podcast, Making It, Amy was able to build a client list effectively just off the network she already had, especially because she was just working for Tony Robbins. But one of the key things that I want to point out here that was really interesting is that one of the things she's at least aware of, she didn't actually set them super well all the time, it didn't seem like, was that she was really clear with boundaries with clients especially. And even people that could have been clients but didn't end up being clients. And one of those potential clients she could have had was the Tony Robbins group. And they would come to her with like, hey, what about doing this project or this thing? And it's probably easier for them because it's like, you already know this. And Amy's like, oh, this is already people I know. It's kind of easier money. But in Amy's world, she's like, I don't want to work for Tony and like even in these projects because she's like, I know it's very easy for me to kind of loop back in and all of a sudden I kind of have a job again at the Tony Robbins group. And she's like, I don't want that. So she has these groups of, about 7 to 8 clients here, and she's doing really well. She's doing about $150K in annual revenue in year 1. And that's pretty solid. But one of the things she mentioned about switching to year 2 was that she's like, this still isn't the life that I want to design. I'm still working a lot of different hours. I'm still working a ton because instead of just having this one boss in Tony Robbins, she really has 7 or 8 different bosses that she reports to because, right, instead of Tony paying her, it's all these, clients that are paying her and she's got to report to them and do really good work. So in year 2, she actually takes a step back in terms of revenue. And I don't have an exact number for this. I wasn't able to find it anywhere in interviews or things like that. So let's just assume it's about like 100K. And it's probably a ballpark somewhere in there. And she took a step back because what she wanted to do was be teaching people in some fashion, but she didn't necessarily know what to be teaching people about. So she's like, I'm going to build an online course. And she's like, I'm just going to listen to people, listen to my audience a little bit. She's got this tiny little audience at this point. And she's like, I'm just going to see what people want. And she ends up going to this big conference event in Colorado. And she meets these two women that she was talking to and to get all excited. And they gave her this idea of like, what if you do this thing about a book, right? How do you do a book launch with social media and things like that? And Amy's like, okay, I'm going to run with this. I'm going to build a course on how to launch a book. But there's one big problem with that. Amy had never launched a book in her life, but she still went along with it, and she still launched this course. And she launches this course. She does this big old, launch camp, she's putting it out there. She's like, okay, I'm going to launch this thing, and I'm going to do really well right off the bat. The problem is she launches it, and she only makes $267 off the entire course. Mind you, the course actually runs she sells it for $299. So not great. But as she mentions in her book, there's kind of two different groups that kind of pick her back up and help her get off the mat a little bit. And one of them is her partner, Hobie, who really gave her a lot of good encouragement. But also she joined a mastermind that was pretty expensive, according to her. And this group, she was able to be vulnerable and be like, hey, this didn't go super well. Like, how did I do this differently? And this is when I think she starts to really figure things out. It was kind of this, like, again, this roller coaster of emotions that you go through as an entrepreneur. So Hobie, her partner, and this mastermind group kind of help her go back up the roller coaster a bit and get her back on her feet. And at this point, right, she's like, all right, I'm going to restart, but I still want to teach. I still want to do an online course. And I still want that to be like the main driver of revenue and how this business works, because that gives her the lifestyle she wants, but also the business that she wants. And she's like, okay, like I want to do this online course, but on what? And this is like one of the main concepts that she talks about a lot. And this is where she brings up this like 10% edge. And by the 10% edge, is that what she means by that is like, what is this, like a thing that you are like have maybe are 10% better at, or something that you can teach kind of people they're not below you, but are more beginner than you in something. And for Amy, this was actually in Facebook marketing. And if you go think back to it, if you were around in 2010, right? 2010, Facebook is still really, really new. It's like people posting like, here's what I did for today and little dinners and things like that. But for Amy, right, she's already been doing some Facebook marketing here, and she did a little bit of this with Tony Robbins himself and doing content here on Facebook. So in terms of like her skill set, right, this is like something that's like really new. Not too many people are doing it. And the timing is right, because Facebook marketing, right, is still like, right, Facebook is about to go do this. Amy didn't know that at the time, but Facebook's about to go absolutely bonkers in terms of marketing and be able to use that as a platform. So she does this, right? She's built this course out for Facebook marketing, and she's building her Facebook following as well. And just by doing an online course on Facebook marketing, she does about $30K in revenue from this course in the first launch. So now I guess this isn't her first launch, but the first launch for this Facebook course does really, really well. And that's because, right, she knows the subject, but she's also kind of using it herself, right? She's posting on Facebook herself there. Now, her $30,000 in revenue here wasn't just because she was posting on Facebook alone. There's a little bit of a strategy here, and this strategy is still something she essentially still uses today. It just has a little more nuance because there's many more channels and whatnot, and Facebook has changed dramatically since she first started. So effectively, right, she would post on Facebook, she would get people to sign up for her email newsletter, and then she would, have them maybe join a webinar, and then that webinar would then sell the course itself, right? So it's a pretty simple sales funnel, and she just kept doing this over and over and over again. And eventually by 2013, she did $950,000 in annual revenue, which is pretty remarkable. So if we think about it, 2009-ish, she did about $150K. She went down maybe 100, and then she skyrockets up to 915 by 2013. So to make this jump right in about 4 years or so is a pretty dramatic jump and pretty darn impressive, especially with this simple sales funnel like this. And before I get into more and like nerd out on the growth strategies and the marketing strategies a little bit more, what I want to do is actually have Amy explain why having a simple business is really critical.
Successful entrepreneurs have two things in common: 2 things in common. Come a little closer. This part's really important. Don't start multitasking now, because I want to make sure that you walk away understanding these 2 things that successful entrepreneurs always have in common, especially those that create digital courses. So the number one thing is they have simple businesses. By simple, I mean that they're not trying to do 20 things at once. They're not trying to do all these different things like spinning plates in the air, so that they're not good at any of it. They're just kind of okay, which means they're not generating a lot of revenue from anything. That's what typically happens when you try to do too many things. So what I teach my students is to create one digital course and launch it over and over and over again.
So with that simplicity message in mind, there's actually 3, I would say, main simple growth strategies that Amy used to really build her simple business. And the first one I want to talk about is Facebook and Facebook ads. And Facebook ads have changed dramatically since, Amy was building her business. But the way, Facebook worked for Amy, right, is it grew really organically, really dramatically. So in 2011, Amy had about 3,000 followers on Facebook. By 2012, she had 18,000 followers there. And then by 2015, she had 155,000. So you can see, right, in this just like this 4-year period, that's like a pretty dramatic growth. And the engagement and things like that on Facebook at this time, right, if you were on Facebook at this time, right, you remember like engagement was super high. It was kind of this like start of social media. So everyone was like engaging, even just like commenting on stupid things and liking, like you were liking like, oh, I like to go to Blockbuster or whatever it might be, right? It was like the dumbest things you would, engage with. But this really helped with Amy in marketing her online courses and really building her business with that. The other thing I'll mention here too, right, is that with all this she was getting more revenue as she's getting new courses and things like that. And she would pump the money back a little bit, at least a part of that money back into Facebook ads. So essentially what she would do, right, is she would do this strategy of like, okay, I'm going to like build organically here. But then I'm going to kind of speed up this organic growth by Facebook ads. So effectively, right, what you're doing is creating like this flywheel here of growth, which is really incredible, right? So these organic posts are going to get helped more and more by these Facebook ads. And because you're doing, you're selling these courses, right, you're going to get more money because these organic posts might be doing better and better and better. The other thing, right, that I want to mention here is just kind of like the overarching trend for Facebook. And actually, Buffett did this really incredible graph that I'll show here. And it's a really important graph to kind of understand because I actually think we're going through this a little bit right now, particularly maybe with TikTok and also Threads. So if you're looking at those 2 platforms, this might be an interesting kind of comparison here. So, right, they mentioned, right, there's kind of this organic growth where engagement goes really, really high. And then it kind of dips, right? Especially as, they're getting more user engagement. The early adopters are kind of like, right, they have more than just the early adopters. And then, right, they kind of focus on like, okay, we want these businesses and these marketers to start paying for ads more and more. And those ads are getting more engagement and more views and things like that, right? So you kind of go through like this 2 kind of humps of how, you get engagement, how you get views. And Amy was able to kind of use both of them with Facebook because, right, she's creating this flywheel here of growth and everything else there. So pretty important concept to use. But one of the other things she would do kind of to help build trust in her audience was by going live. And she would do this by also doing live and webinars. So let's actually get into this second growth strategy that she uses, and she still uses this today, and that is webinars. Now you might be thinking like, oh my gosh, webinars are just corporate and stale and whatnot. But that clip about simplicity was actually from one of her webinars. And it's pretty engaging. She gets comments going, she gets people talking a little bit in there. And it just gives people a really good taste of what it's like to work with Amy. But also, right, if you're on her Facebook audience or maybe her email list, and maybe you haven't actually spent time with her, like the webinar is kind of this like nice from like, you go from the email newsletter, maybe on Facebook, right? And then you're going into this webinar, and if you don't really, maybe you like this email, you like our Facebook post, but it's like, okay, how do I actually maybe engage more with you? If you spend an hour with someone online, even on a video, right, just like meeting with them, you're going to build a lot more trust with them, right? It's better if it's in person, but like even just spending a 1 hour time, like, hey, I'm going to listen to this, even you just listening to watching this, this video, right? You probably have a little more trust with me. But like just by doing this, right, in this webinar, engaging with people and creating a conversation, right, you're building your trust goes way up. And this really helped, right? Because what she would do is do this webinar, and then she would sell the courses through this, right? And this is where she would make her money. And she was saying like even like the conversion rate from webinar to her courses was even like as high as like 10%, which is wild, right? Because e-commerce, right, is typically even like 3%. So to have it like triple is pretty impressive. The one other thing I should mention here about these webinars, right, is that not only is it building trust, but also, right, you're getting like a little sneak peek of what the course is like. Because if you're like, hey, I really like this webinar, right, you're gonna be like, ooh, this course, like if this course is just like 10x of this, right, like that's awesome, right? Like you're getting more and more value. And you get like, okay, do I like this webinar? Do I like Amy's style? Do I like her teaching? Do I see her content is really helpful? Am I learning something in those webinars, right? You're building trust here, but also like you're going to learn something here as well. Can I draw a graduation hat? Yeah, it's okay. Not great, but okay. So according to Amy, right, these webinars have actually been the #1 sales tool that she's had and still are today. These still are a huge lift for her. And she still uses these to sell her courses over and over again. They're still the #1 sales tool for Amy and her business. And I would go as far as to say that these webinars are the #1 lead magnet for Amy, because what she'll do, right, is that she'll have these webinars and she'll use, right, she still uses this today, right, she'll use the ads and she'll, instead of, sending people from Facebook ads to the course, right, you're kind of like skipping all the steps in the sales funnel. What she does is she sends people instead of, to the course, she's taking these Facebook ads and she sends them typically to her webinars. Because again, if she gets people to a webinar, instead of having a 3% conversion rate, she's getting a 10%, which is much higher. And the revenue numbers, right, are significantly different by doing that. So I would say like this is their #1 lead magnet. Now, let's say people don't actually buy and maybe they're still kind of engaging, things like that. This is where I think it's really clever by Amy and her team. So what they do is this third kind of growth strategies. And then this is what Amy really preaches. And this is actually what she says is their biggest mistake in her entire business. And that's saying something compared to some of the mistakes she's made. And that is, right, she didn't start her email list soon enough. And she does this email strategy really, really high level, right? So let's kind of go back to this webinars, right? So if she doesn't get someone to buy through the webinar or whatnot, but they still want to maybe engage and things like that, she gets them to add to her email list. So email list, right? And one of the things she'll do, right, is like if you join here in this email list, and let's say like you go to the webinar, but then there's like a post email strategy. Maybe it's like 1, 2, 3 emails, right? They're kind of a nurturing strategy of like, hey, like you can join the course here. Like, hey, there's only 5 more days, and here's like the last 24 hours, right? Like maybe some typical marketing emails like that we all kind of put up with, I guess. But the other thing, right, is like she only goes into these launches for like 10 to 12 days for launching her course and things like that. So it's not just a constant like sales email, right? She has her podcast and she does a ton of other content that she'll put into her email list here, right? And so maybe it's like, hey, okay, I went through the webinar here, right? And I didn't buy, but then I got this email about like how to start a podcast. Ooh, that's kind of interesting. Ooh, here's actually, some of the tools I like, right? Here's the resources, right? So she's kind of just like building trust with you. Like, here's this little thing. Here's this educational moment. Here's this like motivational moment, right? Because her emails are really short and sweet. They're like maybe like 250 words tops. Like they're short and sweet, but she'll send like a weekly newsletter here. And then she'll also send, right, depending on how you kind of signed up, maybe through like one of her like workbooks or guides or quizzes, right? Depending on how you signed up, she'll also kind of feed you resources that she thinks you might think, might be helpful. So maybe you signed up for like the podcast or like one of her course building, like how to build a course. She'll send you like personalized emails. It's a sequence of emails. One that's like, okay, like what do you actually need in your course? Need in the course, right? And then like how long should it be? What equipment do you need, right? Might be the third one, right? Like she gives you personalized things based on how you signed up to it. So, right, you're getting like personalized emails and like little tidbits and feedback and learning moments, but also, right, you're getting the weekly newsletter, which is like typically the content that she's doing with like podcasting and Facebook and Instagram, whatever it might be, right? So this is really helpful in terms of building trust with people, but also just keeping people engaged. And the other thing I should mention here is that this is a really big deal, and why Amy says this is like the thing she should have started way earlier is because email sells way better than any other platform out there. And there's kind of 2 reasons. One is that, right, you control the content, you control the algorithm and all that. But also 2, right, you're getting a lot more trust, you're in people's inboxes. And those 2 reasons are such a big deal that for every $1, right, that you put into email marketing, you get $38 back on average, right? And this is from data from the Marketing Association out there. And I'll put the report in the link if you want to check it out. But you get for every dollar, right, you get $38. So when you see people talking about newsletters and why you should start an email list, this is the reason. Like no other platform, maybe you're selling on Instagram or on LinkedIn, no other platform is going to sell as well as that, right? And Amy's talked about this, and a ton of other business owners have done this a ton. It's talked about like the value of having an email list, and Amy Porterfield is no different. But, right, she has this really simple, again, this simplicity in sales funnel, just kind of wrap all this up, right? She sends people from Facebook. She gets them on her email newsletter, or she sends them to a webinar, right? And they're watching, and then she's going to get them onto their course and things like that, right? This is the money, right? This is the course. But it's this very simple sales funnel from like Facebook, maybe to social media today, right? I'm going to get you with the email. I'm going to get you on a webinar, and then hopefully, right, you're going to buy into this course because I've built trust. I've kind of, right, it's not just like, hey, you just met me. Let me, buy something for you right now. It's a very, like relational way of doing sales, and it can be a little bit salesy at times, but also at the same time, right, if you're providing value, you should feel good about selling it as well. And it's okay to be a little bit salesy. Now, all of this, right, has led to Amy building a really amazing business, one that has a podcast that's called Online Made Simple with over 60 million downloads, which is still bonkers to me. And she's made over $100 million in total revenue with just these, mainly through these online courses. Now, if you found this video helpful, I would love it if you can give it a like. And if you're looking for more resources like this, check out my own newsletter down in the description down below.